Editor of The Nation. Chris, thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel.
Again, the news we are reporting tonight from the Washington Post is that Governor McDonnell appears to have climbed down on his third far-right governing decision. First, a sort of climb down on the issue of rescinding gay rights in the state of Virginia. Second, a climb down on not including slavery in a proclamation of Confederate History Month. And now he appears to be inexpertly climbing down on his proposal for a pseudo-literacy test for the restoration of voting rights in Virginia. Last week, days before Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens announced he was retiring, the Republican Party was already threatening to filibuster his potential replacement. The senior senator from Minnesota, Democrat Amy Klobuchar, joined me on set to talk about that and to address speculation that if Justice Stevens did retire, she could be his replacement. Thanks for coming in.
But as you see, I'm wearing the wrong color to be on the Supreme Court.
Well, your microphone is black.
Yeah, that's correct.
It's very slimming.
And also there's all those old speeches of mine that you would find. Remember the Sotomayor wise Latina?
Yeah.
Where I called myself a wise Slovenian. So it's over before it even started.
I don't know if you really got the Slovenian people behind you in America.
Yes,
it could be an unstoppable
it's a small
political
but mighty
bloc.
country. That's right.
Is it flattering to be mentioned? Is it just awkward? Is it both?
No, it is, but I love my job now. And as you know, as you pointed out with the Senate, there's a lot of work to be done there.
For all the joking around, if you notice there, Senator Klobuchar never actually did say a definitive no to the Supreme Court job, right? Neat. Today, she definitively said no. Huffington Post asked her if she would serve on the court if President Obama asked her to. She said emphatically, quote, "No, I love my job." No, as in no. So there you have it, no. One of the potential nominees takes herself out of the running. Still ahead, another person whose name is being floated as a possibility for the court, Elizabeth Warren, chair of the Oversight Panel for the TARP bailout funds and beloved national hero for making the financial crisis make some sense to those of us who don't have a PhD in finance. Elizabeth Warren joins us in just a moment. The Associated Press has a remarkable story out today about conservative politics falling way off the deep end in the great state of Oklahoma. This is Randy Brogdon. Randy Brogdon is a Republican state senator in Oklahoma. He's running for governor in Oklahoma. Part of his platform, apparently, is to build an Oklahoma-specific army to be an armed resistance against the government of the United States. This is not one of those things like Georgia, where people get confused by the headlines sometimes because it's like, oh, you mean Georgia the country is at war with Russia, not Georgia the state. That would be a way bigger deal for America. No, Randy Brogdon actually wants to be governor of the American state of Oklahoma. There's no other country called Oklahoma, but he wants the state of Oklahoma to get ready to wage armed resistance against the United States government. From the lead of today's AP piece, quote, "Frustrated by recent political setbacks, Tea Party leaders and some conservative members of the Oklahoma legislature say they would like to create a new volunteer militia to help defend against what they believe are improper federal infringements on state sovereignty." So this isn't a militia to be formed to demonstrate support for the Second Amendment. This isn't like an emergency preparedness group or something like some militias say they are. This is explicitly an armed force to use force against the improper infringements of the federal government on state sovereignty. Members of the state legislature, including a Republican candidate for governor, apparently aren't getting what they want from the political process, so they've decided to turn to armed force instead. One of the Tea Party leaders working on this with the candidate for governor, a Tea Partier named Al Gerhardt, told the AP, quote, "Is it scary? It sure is. But when do the states stop rolling over for the federal government?" If that's a rhetorical question, I'm guessing the answer is that the states, in his mind, stop rolling over for the federal government when the states form their own armies to shoot at the federal government. Is that what you mean? Because if it's not what you mean, what do you mean? Randy Brogdon, the Republican candidate for governor in Oklahoma, is himself making that case, saying, quote, "The Second Amendment deals directly with the right of an individual to keep and bear arms to protect themselves from an overreaching federal government," end quote. In case you're wondering, Randy's fantasizing here. There isn't actually anything in the real Second Amendment about the overreaching federal government. It's not like a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state against the overreaching federal government and the tyranny of health insurance reform. It doesn't say that. Another Republican state lawmaker, Charles Key, is quoted by the Associated Press as saying, quote, there is a good chance of introducing legislation for a state-authorized militia next year. We called Representative Key's office today to find out if he really meant that. His office told us that Representative Key didn't really say what the AP said he said, but they wouldn't clarify for us what he did say. If we do find out that Oklahoma state legislators are going through with this sedition plan, we'll let you know. I mean, honestly, probably the FBI will let you know first, but then we'll let you know as soon as they put out the press release. Joining us now is Eve Conant, whose article in the current issue of Newsweek magazine details the current rise in anti-government extremism. Eve, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, Rachel.
Anti-government extremism, frankly, is always out there in one form or another. What is the evidence that it's actually on the rise right now?
Well, you see evidence from a couple of different sources. One is, of course, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks extremist groups and has recently put out a report saying that patriot groups, which are sort of anti-government groups, some of them are militias, have grown significantly over the past year. There's been about a 244% increase in these groups, according to the SPLC. You also have law enforcement agencies, the Pentagon tightening restrictions, as we have in our piece, on soldiers, people in the military who are members of extremist groups, making sure that they can't be members of these groups or just keeping better track of them. And, of course, you have incidents like we saw recently with Joseph Stack riding his plane into the IRS building. You have the Pentagon shooter. You have threats against senators up 30%. So across the board, you see all of these anti-government activities sort of bubbling on the web, in particular with the SPLC tracking those. It's sort of a perfect storm of different sources. And just look at the news. Just sort of every week or so there seems to be another incident related to this.
Militia groups, particularly post-Oklahoma City bombing, have tried to use, in some cases, really non-threatening language to describe themselves, essentially making themselves out to be like gun clubs or emergency readiness groups. This Oklahoma group is not putting any sort of shine on what they're doing. They're saying they want to do military training in order to fight the federal government in Oklahoma. How intrinsic is anti-government sentiment to the militia movement?
I think it's absolutely key. I think it's the fundamental part of the militia movement, of the militias within the Patriot movement. They see, or they fear, that there's going to be a one-world government. They fear foreign troops on U.S. soil. They fear that the U.S. government is going to infringe on their rights, will take away their guns. This paranoia and fear is what drives these groups. It's not about being a offensive force to overthrow the government. It's always in the literature. If you look on the websites, it's always about defense, and that the best defense is to be prepared, to be armed, to be organized. And that sounds like what we're seeing in Oklahoma. Is what we see with other militia groups as well. It's always about defense and paranoia fueling the need to gather arms and to gather strength.
Eve Conant of Newsweek magazine, thank you for reporting on this for Newsweek. I feel like we've been doing the best reporting on it that we can based on the sources that are out there so far. Not a lot of national reporters devoted to this yet, and we found your reporting to be really invaluable. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Eve Conant of Newsweek magazine. News of the Oklahoma militia plan comes 15 years after the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City, which of course killed 168 Americans. On the actual anniversary of that bombing, 15 years later, April 19th, MSNBC is going to air a documentary that's based on never-before-heard tapes of Timothy McVeigh, actual interviews with McVeigh recorded with him in prison while he awaited execution. There were dozens of hours of tapes. Most of them could not fit into the 2-hour documentary. But in light of this news today from Oklahoma, Representative Key, who we called today, represents Oklahoma City. I wanted to play you this one piece of tape from McVeigh. This is accompanied by simulated images from the documentary. This piece of tape that we're going to play here has never before been broadcast, but in light of today's news, I think it's important and newsworthy, and I wanted you to hear it.
It did have a purpose, direct attrition of federal employees, okay? It had a purpose destruction of a federal outpost, as you could put it, or a base of operations, okay? It had at its purpose the destruction of a command and control center. It had at its purpose the destruction of support personnel and a psychological effect of reducing their morale, okay? And making them question what they're doing. And making it a public building in the middle of an open area allows not only for a dissipation of the blast, as I said before, to control collateral damage, but it also allows cameras to get the full view, okay, and increases the impact on the American psyche. It had at its center to destroy infrastructure. It had at its center some messages, including, if you want to wage a war, this is how ugly it's going to get. You can only sit back for so long and let the enemy attack you before you got to strike back at the enemy on his turf. So it was bringing the fight to their own turf. How do you like it, mother?